the square is silent, not because there are no people, but because no one wants to be noticed. A platform stands in the center, wooden, elevated, deliberately visible. At its base, guards wait without expression. Above them, a priest reads from a document. Names are not shouted, they are pronounced. Carefully, formally, as if accuracy might save someone. A man steps forward, not a criminal, not an outsider, a Christian, baptized, confirmed, known. He does not protest, he does not plead. He looks straight ahead, as if movement itself might betray him. This is not a trial meant to discover truth. This is a ceremony meant to demonstrate obedience. The Spanish Inquisition did not begin with fire. It began with silence. Silence taught faster. The man has already confessed. Or rather, he has already signed. The distinction no longer matters. He confessed to practices he no longer remembers clearly. Habits learned in childhood. Gestures once considered harmless. Eating the wrong food. Washing the wrong way. Remembering the wrong prayers. Nothing here is violent. That is the point. This is Spain, late 15th century. A kingdom freshly unified, a crown newly secure, and a faith newly examined. For centuries, belief had been personal, messy, inherited, contradictory. Now it was being standardized. The Spanish Inquisition did not ask, "What do you believe?" It asked, "Can you be trusted?" That question changed everything. From this moment on, faith stopped being spiritual. It became administrative. Documents replaced confession. Procedure replaced conscience. Correctness replaced conviction. The man on the platform understands this instinctively. He is not afraid of God. He is afraid of being misread. Because misinterpretation is fatal in a system that does not correct itself. The crowd watches without expression, not because they agree, but because attention is dangerous. This is the human break point, the moment when survival requires not belief, but alignment. Spain did not invent religious fear, but it perfected something colder. The Inquisition was not created to convert. It was created to filter, to separate what could be governed from what could not. The crown did not fear heresy. It feared ambiguity. Converted Jews, converted Muslims, people who claimed Christian faith but carried histories that could not be fully erased. Faith had become unreliable, and unreliable systems cannot be ruled. So Spain built a mechanism, not of chaos, of order. The Inquisition was designed to make belief legible, predictable, defensible. Every ritual was catalogued, every deviation recorded, every inconsistency remembered. This was not fanaticism. It was governance. The man on the platform is sentenced. Not to death. Not yet. He is reconciled, marked, released. And now he understands something irreversible. He is no longer innocent. He is visible. That visibility will follow him. Into his home, into his family, into every conversation that suddenly feels watched. This is how fear enters a society. Not through terror, but through memory. The Inquisition did not need to burn everyone. It only needed to make sure everyone remembered what could happen. From this moment forward, faith would no longer protect Spaniards. It would test them. Belief became a performance. Silence became strategy. Sameness became safety. The man steps down from the platform. The crowd exhales. Quietly. The ceremony ends. Life resumes. Nothing looks broken. That is why it works. The Spanish Inquisition did not destroy Spain overnight. It reorganized it, and what was built here did not disappear when this square emptied. It proved something far more dangerous. That fear, when dressed as faith, can govern an entire civilization without resistance. The Spanish Inquisition did not rule by chaos. It ruled by procedure. Fear alone is unstable. It shocks, it burns, it fades. What endures is system, and the Inquisition was a system built to make fear permanent. Once established, it operated with precision, not like a mob, not like a riot, but like an office. Accusations did not require witnesses. They required plausibility. Anyone could report suspicion. Names were optional. Evidence was flexible. Intent was inferred. The accused would never know who spoke. That uncertainty mattered more than any punishment. Because fear multiplies when it cannot be traced. Inquisitors were not theologians debating doctrine. They were administrators managing risk. They asked procedural questions. What prayers were spoken? What foods were eaten? What customs survived? Belief was not examined as conviction. It was examined as pattern. Deviation, even accidental, became a file. Files became records. Records became identity. Once recorded, nothing was forgotten. Trials were conducted in secrecy. No confrontation with accusers. No public defense. No opportunity to correct rumor. This was justified as protection. Protection of witnesses. Protection of order. Protection of the faith. In reality, it protected authority. Confession became the central goal. Not because confession revealed truth, but because confession ended ambiguity. A confessing subject was no longer unpredictable. They were manageable. Those who confessed early were shown mercy. Those who hesitated were labeled obstinate. And obstinacy itself was considered proof. This reversed the logic of justice. Silence became suspicious. Defense became resistance. Innocence became irrelevant. Even acquittal did not restore safety. The name remained. The mark persisted. Surveillance did not end with a verdict. It began there. This ensured something crucial. The Inquisition did not need to act constantly. Its reputation acted in its place. People adjusted behavior preemptively. They corrected children before mistakes occurred. They avoided habits that might be misread. They abandoned customs quietly. Self-censorship replaced enforcement. This was the mechanism. Faith was no longer a relationship with God. It became a relationship with authority. Not direct authority, procedural authority. People learned what mattered. Not sincerity, not devotion, but consistency. Consistency made belief legible. Legibility made belief governable. This was not fanaticism. It was administration. The Inquisition understood something states would later master: that people do not need to be terrorized constantly to obey permanently. They need to be uncertain. Uncertainty produces caution. Caution produces conformity. From this point on, faith stopped being spiritual. It became administrative. Belief was processed, measured, filed. What could not be measured was treated as threat. The Church provided language. The Crown provided authority. This alliance transformed faith into infrastructure. Infrastructure is not debated. It is used. The Inquisition did not ask people to love the system. It only required them not to challenge it. And most did not. Because challenging it looked like guilt. This is the quiet efficiency of the mechanism. No spectacle required, no constant violence. Only compliance trained through routine. The Inquisition did not collapse conscience. It replaced it. Instead of asking, "What is right?" people learned to ask, "What is safe?" That question reshaped daily life. Meals, speech, prayer. Faith became a checklist. Deviation became danger. And once belief is reduced to procedure, power no longer needs conviction. It needs documentation. The Spanish Inquisition succeeded because it transformed belief into something the state could manage. Not by destroying faith, but by reorganizing it. This system did not die when a single inquisitor left office. It lived on in habit, in silence, in caution passed down. The mechanism had proven itself. And systems that work are never abandoned willingly. The Spanish Inquisition did not need to reach into every home. It only needed people to bring it inside themselves. Fear works best when it becomes intimate. The damage did not begin in the courtroom. It began at the table. Families learned to speak carefully, not in public, but among themselves. Children were corrected mid-sentence. Questions were interrupted. Stories stopped halfway through. Not because parents were cruel, but because memory was dangerous. A grandmother's habit, a grandfather's phrase, a gesture repeated without thought. Anything could become evidence years later. The Inquisition did not punish curiosity directly. It punished being remembered. So families adapted. They edited their past. They simplified their rituals. They erased difference quietly. This was the human cost. Not mass death, but mass restraint. People did not stop believing. They stopped expressing belief freely. Fear reshaped identity. A man who had converted sincerely still watched his hands when he ate. A woman who prayed daily still checked who was listening. Faith became something you rehearsed, not something you lived. Public life grew louder. Private life grew smaller. Churches were full, but trust was empty. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Conversations stayed shallow. Friendships became conditional, because denunciation did not require hatred, only caution. Anyone could report suspicion to protect themselves. Silence looked safer than loyalty. This created a new moral logic, not good and evil, but safe and unsafe. People did not ask, "Is this right?" They asked, "Will this be noticed?" That question changed behavior more effectively than force ever could. The Inquisition trained people to monitor themselves. A society that monitors itself does not need constant policing. This was the system's triumph. Children learn the rules early. Do not stand out. Do not remember too much. Do not ask why. Faith became inherited caution. The human breakpoint came quietly. A father hears his son repeat a phrase learned from an older relative. It is harmless. It is familiar. But it does not sound correct. The father interrupts. Not angrily, urgently. The son does not understand. The father does, because the father knows that innocence does not protect you from procedure. This is how fear reproduces. No violence is required, only memory. People began to police each other without being asked. Not because they believed in the system, but because the system had taught them what survival looked like. The Inquisition did not just punish deviation. It punished difference remembered too clearly. This eroded something essential. Faith had once created community, shared rituals, shared meaning, shared risk. Now it created isolation. Each person became responsible for their own safety. And responsible people do not take chances. Religious life grew rigid, predictable, uniform. Uniformity feels stable, but it is fragile. Because when belief is reduced to outward compliance, it loses its ability to bind people together. Fear separates. Spain did not become godless. It became careful. Careful societies survive, but they do not flourish. Intellectual curiosity narrowed. Creative expression softened. Disagreement retreated. Not because ideas disappeared, but because voicing them was no longer worth the risk. The Inquisition created silence that sounded like unity. And silence can be mistaken for peace. But peace without trust is only absence of noise. The human cost of the Inquisition was not visible in statistics. It was visible in habits. The way people ate, the way they spoke, the way they remembered. The system did not need to destroy every dissenter. It only needed to convince the rest to self-edit. This is the most efficient form of control. When people censor themselves, power does not look oppressive. It looks invisible. The Inquisition did not need to be everywhere. Its logic already was. Fear had replaced faith as the organizing force of daily life. Belief survived, but it survived cautiously. And cautious belief cannot carry a society through crisis, because crisis requires courage, and courage requires trust. Trust had been disciplined out. This is what was lost. Not religion, but the freedom to live belief without calculation. The Inquisition did not destroy souls. It taught them to hide. And hiding, over generations, reshapes what people think belief is. Faith became quiet, not contemplative, but defensive. That was the human cost. And once a society learns to live this way, it does not easily unlearn it. Because fear, once internalized, no longer needs an institution to enforce it. The Spanish Inquisition did not act alone. It never did. Behind every tribunal stood a decision already made elsewhere. The Inquisition is often remembered as a religious institution, but that framing hides the real architecture of power. The Spanish Inquisition belonged not to the church, but to the crown. This distinction changes everything. In earlier centuries, Inquisitions answered primarily to Rome. They were irregular, fragmented, often resisted by local authorities. Spain was different. When Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile authorized the Inquisition in 1478, they did not ask permission. They requested confirmation. The difference is subtle, but decisive. Rome sanctioned the tribunal, but the crown controlled it. Inquisitors were appointed with royal approval. Procedures were shaped by royal interest. Confiscated property flowed into royal coffers. The church provided legitimacy. The crown exercised authority. This was not a partnership of equals. It was a hierarchy. Faith became an instrument of governance. Spain in the late 15th century was a kingdom in transition. Castile and Aragon were united politically, but not socially. Regional identities persisted. Religious minorities remained numerous. Economic networks crossed confessional lines. Unity existed on paper, not in trust. The crown faced a problem that every emerging empire eventually confronts. How do you govern a population whose loyalties are complex, layered, and opaque? Military force alone cannot solve this. Force creates obedience, but obedience is temporary. What the crown needed was moral alignment. The Inquisition provided it. By defining religious orthodoxy, the crown also defined loyalty. To be a good Christian was no longer a matter of belief. It was a matter of compliance. Those who complied were safe. Those who hesitated were suspect. Those who deviated were isolated. This system did not merely punish dissent. It mapped society. The Inquisition functioned as a sorting mechanism. It identified risk. It classified uncertainty. It removed ambiguity. Converted populations, conversos and moriscos, were not targeted primarily for theology. They were targeted for unpredictability. Unpredictable populations cannot be governed efficiently. By placing these groups under constant scrutiny, the crown neutralized potential instability without open revolt. This was governance without warfare. The genius of the system was that it appeared moral. Punishments were framed as purification, confiscations as justice, surveillance as protection. Resistance became indistinguishable from guilt. To oppose the Inquisition was to oppose Christian unity. To oppose Christian unity was to oppose Spain itself. This fusion of faith and loyalty allowed the crown to expand control without appearing tyrannical. The monarchy remained distant. The tribunal acted locally. The population blamed procedure, not power. This insulation was deliberate. The crown did not need to appear cruel. The system handled cruelty impersonally. Executions, when they occurred, were presented as necessity, not punishment. The Inquisition did not need to convince people it was just. It only needed to convince them it was inevitable. Inevitability is more effective than terror. Over time, the Spanish monarchy achieved something rare: a population that regulated itself according to state-aligned morality. Obedience became virtue. Silence became loyalty. Sameness became safety. This arrangement strengthened the crown in the short term. Revenue increased. Control deepened. Opposition fragmented. But the cost was invisible at first. By binding faith to political loyalty, the crown reduced religion's independence. Faith could no longer challenge authority. It could only reinforce it. This transformation hollowed religion from within. Belief still existed. Ritual continued. Devotion persisted. But faith had lost its ability to resist power. And resistance is what gives belief moral weight. The Inquisition did not destroy the Church. It domesticated it. Clergy learned caution. Institutions learned cooperation. Dissent learned silence. Spain became orderly, predictable, governable. But governance achieved through fear always carries a delayed cost. Because systems built on compliance struggle to adapt. Innovation looks like deviation. Debate looks like danger. Change looks like threat. The crown had solved one problem by creating another. Short-term unity at the expense of long-term vitality. This is the paradox at the heart of the Spanish Inquisition. It succeeded because it worked too well. It aligned faith with power so completely that belief lost the freedom to renew itself. Once faith became an arm of authority, it could no longer question authority. And when belief cannot question power, power no longer corrects itself. The Inquisition proved something enduring. That religion, when controlled by the state, can stabilize an empire. But it also proved something more dangerous. That stability purchased through fear weakens the very foundations it claims to protect. This was not visible in one generation. It took centuries to surface. But the pattern was set. The crown had gained control. Faith had lost autonomy. And a civilization had accepted the trade. This system did not collapse immediately. It endured. Because it was useful. But usefulness is not permanence. And what Spain gained in order, it would later lose in flexibility, trust, and resilience. The Inquisition did not merely enforce belief. It redefined the relationship between faith and power. From this point on, religion in Spain would exist not above authority, but beneath it. That decision could not be undone. The Spanish Inquisition did not collapse Spain overnight. That is why its damage lasted. Civilizations rarely fall from one blow. They weaken through habits, through systems that work too well for too long. For generations, the Inquisition delivered what it promised: order, uniformity, predictability. Spain appeared stable, devout, unified. But stability enforced through fear does not strengthen a civilization. It freezes it. The first losses were subtle, not political, not military, but cultural. Conversation narrowed. Curiosity softened. Questions learned to die quietly. Faith survived. But it no longer generated courage. It generated caution. The Church remained powerful in form, but hollow in function. When belief cannot question authority, it loses the capacity to correct society. Religion once provided a moral counterweight to power. The Inquisition removed that counterweight. From that moment on, faith could reinforce authority, but not restrain it. This shift mattered. Because societies endure not by obedience alone, but by self-correction. Spain's system discouraged self-correction. Doubt looked dangerous. Innovation looked deviant. Debate looked subversive. As Europe changed, Spain struggled to respond. New ideas did not arrive as conversation. They arrived as threat. The habits formed under the Inquisition made adaptation difficult. Fear had trained people to avoid the unfamiliar. This affected more than religion. It shaped governance, economics, intellectual life. A culture that fears deviation cannot experiment freely, and a culture that cannot experiment eventually stagnates. The Inquisition did not cause decline by itself, but it prepared the conditions for it. Faith, once disciplined, could no longer inspire reform. When reform is impossible, pressure builds. Spain remained obedient. But obedience is not strength. Strength requires trust. Trust between citizens. Trust between institutions. Trust between belief and conscience. The Inquisition eroded that trust. People learned to survive individually, but societies survive collectively. Fear fragments. By the time the Inquisition's power waned, its logic had already done its work. Silence had become normal. Caution had become virtue. Sameness had become safety. These are not foundations of resilience. They are symptoms of exhaustion. The tragedy is not that faith was suppressed. It is that faith was domesticated. Belief remained, but it no longer pushed outward. It folded inward. A civilization that trains belief to retreat eventually loses its moral momentum. What Spain lost was not religion. It lost confidence of conscience. And confidence, once broken, does not return easily. The Inquisition promised purity. What it delivered was fragility, a fragile faith, a fragile society, a fragile relationship between power and belief. The collapse was not dramatic. That is why it went unnoticed. Spain continued. But something essential had been removed. The ability to adapt without fear. This loss cannot be measured in executions. It must be measured in what never happened, ideas never voiced, challenges never raised, paths never explored. That is the cost of fear when it becomes policy. And once a civilization accepts that cost, it rarely understands what it has given up. Until it is too late, the Spanish Inquisition does not leave us with a mystery. It leaves us with a verdict. This was not a tragedy born of excess. It was the result of design. The Inquisition did not fail. It succeeded. And that is precisely why it matters. It proved that faith could be reorganized, that belief could be standardized, that conscience could be administered without open revolt. It proved that fear, when clothed in moral language, does not feel like oppression. It feels like order. The Inquisition did not demand disbelief. It demanded predictability. People were not asked to abandon God. They were asked to behave as the system required, and most complied. Not because they were evil, but because survival favors caution. This is the uncomfortable truth. The Spanish Inquisition did not operate against human nature. it operated with it. It understood that people fear exclusion more than punishment, that uncertainty is more effective than constant violence, that silence is easier to enforce than belief. By the time resistance became unthinkable, nothing looked broken. That is the danger. Faith remained visible. Churches were full. Rituals continued. But belief had lost independence. When faith can no longer challenge power, it no longer restrains it. The Inquisition claimed to protect Christianity. In doing so, it stripped Christianity of its moral leverage. Faith became a tool of empire. And tools do not judge their owners. This relationship did not end with the Spanish Inquisition. It did not belong only to Spain. The method survived because it worked. Whenever belief is made measurable, it becomes governable. Whenever conscience is documented, it becomes manageable. Whenever fear is justified as virtue, obedience follows. The Inquisition showed that power does not need to crush faith. It only needs to own its enforcement. Once enforcement belongs to authority, belief becomes secondary. This is the pattern. And patterns, once revealed, rarely disappear. The Spanish Inquisition was not an aberration. It was a demonstration that civilizations can be disciplined without chains, that societies can be reordered without chaos, that fear can be normalized without ever being named. The verdict, then, is not moral outrage. It is recognition. This system did exactly what it was built to do. It created unity through caution, stability through silence, order through fear. And in doing so, it permanently altered the relationship between faith and power. From this moment in history onward, belief would no longer stand above authority. It would stand beneath it. That is the fracture. Faith did not disappear, but it lost the freedom to confront empire. And when faith cannot confront power, it becomes decoration, ritual without resistance, tradition without courage. The Spanish Inquisition did not burn faith away. It trained faith to obey. That obedience lasted longer than any tribunal. The final question, then, is not whether the Inquisition was cruel. Cruelty is easy to condemn. The question is harder. Why did it work? It worked because fear aligned with survival, because silence looked like safety, because conformity felt rational, and because the system never asked people to believe something new. It only asked them to stop being uncertain. That is why this story does not end in Spain. Every time belief is required to prove loyalty, every time conscience is measured instead of trusted, every time fear is justified as moral necessity, the logic of the Inquisition returns, not with fire, not with spectacle, but with procedure. The Spanish Inquisition was not about faith. It was about control, and control, once learned, is never unlearned easily. That is the verdict history delivers, not condemnation, not absolution, but recognition of a method that changed civilization without ever declaring itself an enemy.